The US national debt just topped $30 trillion. That's $90,000 per citizen and $239,000 per taxpayer. Do you have $239,000 just sitting around to pay off your share? If so, you can go to pay.gov and make a donation to the US government. Yeah, I think for most people, phrases like "when hell freezes over" or "when pigs fly" will come to mind. Anyway, in this video, we are going to be looking at how we got into this crazy situation, how much worse it could get, what effect it could have on the average citizen, and how you can protect yourself from it. And guys, if you like this kind of content, do check out some of the other videos on my channel. I upload credit card, personal finance, investing, crypto videos almost every day. So do check them out and subscribe if you're new. So how did we get here? Well, the US government started accumulating large amounts of debt really after the market crash of 1929. The debt peaked at $269 billion, or 119% of GDP, in 1946, just after World War II, which I guess is understandable. I mean, we had just fought the biggest war in history. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, the debt remained reasonably stable around 30% of GDP, but in the mid-80s, it started to rise again, hitting $3 trillion, or 54% of GDP around the time of the first Iraq War in 1990. The accumulation of debt did slow down briefly during the Bill Clinton years, where he actually had a balanced budget. Bill is just great at balancing things. He was balancing the budget, Hillary, Monica. Anyway, let's move on. It hit $7 trillion, or 60% of GDP, during the second Iraq War in 2004. Anyone notice a pattern here? Like wars, they cost a lot of money we don't have. It then hit $13 trillion, or 90% of GDP, in 2010 during the aftermath of the global financial crisis, and it has continued to rise with some of the biggest increases during 2020 and 2021 as the US government spent $5 trillion of borrowed money to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. And we are now at $30 trillion, or 128% of GDP. That's the highest level both in monetary terms and as a percentage of GDP. Originally, the US was only projected to hit $30 trillion in 2025, where it would have been a lower percentage of GDP than it is now because GDP would have risen more by then. The interest payments on the debt are now one of the 4 biggest items in the federal budget. In 2021, the US government paid $562 billion in interest payments, which is such a waste of money. I mean, that could have paid for like 80 Minuteman III nuclear missiles. So how much worse is it going to get? Well, late last year, lawmakers did pass a debt ceiling increase that will let the US government run the debt up to $31.4 trillion. This prevented the US defaulting on its debt for now. But with spending out of control, that only covers us until 2023. If the US government really did default on its debt, the value of the dollar would fall, driving the US economy into recession. The cost of imports would increase because the value of the dollar went down, inflation, and thus the standard of living for Americans would go down. And this would all probably start the process of the US dollar being replaced by something else as the world's global reserve currency, radically changing the US's position in the world. But assuming the US doesn't default anytime soon, what else could happen because of the rising debt? Well, with the Fed planning on raising interest rates in March, the cost of borrowing money is going to go up. Right now, the interest the US government pays on its debt is only about 7% of revenues. But as interest rates rise, that percentage is going to go up, and according to some models, could reach 45% of revenues by the year 2050. That means the US government would pay $60 trillion in interest payments over the next 30 years. Just let that sink in. The debt is 30 trillion, but we would have to pay 60 trillion just in interest over the next 30 years without even touching the debt. That's like 8,571 Minuteman III nuclear missiles worth. Now, this may all give you a hint why the US government doesn't really seem to care about inflation right now. The consumer price index has been running at 7% for 2021 and doesn't look like it's going to slow down anytime soon. The producer price index, which measures wholesale prices, was running at 9.6% in November, the most recent month we have data for. And this index normally precedes increases in the consumer price index because the producer price index is measuring the prices wholesalers and businesses pay for goods and services, and they then pass on those costs to the consumers. So there's normally a little bit of a lag time as those costs get passed on to the consumer price index. And the consumer price index is the most commonly used general measure of inflation. Now, since inflation devalues the dollar, it actually makes the US government's debt go down in real terms. If you borrow $1 trillion this year and inflation was running at 10%, for example, well, next year that will only be worth $900 billion in real terms. As GDP rises, the debt will thus take up a smaller percentage of GDP and become more manageable. However, this hurts hardworking people, and I'm going to say it's going to be one of the biggest negative effects on people because throughout this whole debt thing, probably in the end, the government will have no choice but to kind of inflate out of its debt. Even if the government does bring inflation under control with interest rate hikes, that will cause the cost of those interest payments to go up. And as interest payments rise astronomically, a default on the debt could cause the value of the dollar to go down and huge inflation anyway. So what can you do to protect yourself from inflation? Well, there are certain asset classes that are seen as a hedge against inflation. Commodities, for example. Oil has just hit a 7-year high. So you could buy commodities or stocks of companies that deal in those commodities. For example, my position in BP is up 23% since I bought it last year, and my position in ExxonMobil is up 14% since I bought it just a few weeks ago. Then you could also look into Series I savings bonds. This is a US government bond that is specifically designed to match or just slightly beat the rate of inflation. These bonds currently yield 7.12%, and you're allowed to buy up to $10,000 of them per year. You can purchase them through the Treasury Direct website. Then you have physical gold, silver, and other precious metals. Now, these are traditionally seen as a hedge against inflation and could serve even as an alternate currency in a doomsday or Mad Max type scenario. So personally, I do hold some physical gold and silver, but not that much. Then there is also crypto, which for some time has been seen as a hedge against inflation, some people even saying that it's the new gold. However, in recent months, it has moved more in unison with stocks. So with crypto, yes, it is a hedge against inflation, particularly Bitcoin. It's seen as a store of value. However, it's so new and so volatile, no one really knows what could happen to it if the whole US economy crumbles. And then we have long-term debt. And just like with the US government's debt, inflation benefits holders of long-term debt. So if you have a mortgage on your home or on an investment property or any kind of loan for that matter, especially if it's at a fixed rate, as inflation happens, the cost of everything goes up, including labor. So eventually your wages are going to go up. But guess what? Your mortgage payment is going to stay exactly the same. So let's say you earn $4,000 a month now and your mortgage payment is $1,000. Well, after a few years of inflation, maybe you'll end up earning $5,000 a month. But guess what? Your mortgage payment is still going to be $1,000. So it frees up extra disposable income. And right now, it is the perfect time to take out long-term debt. Since interest rates are still low, the Fed hasn't raised them yet, and inflation is running high. Guys, if you want me to do a full detailed video on all the ways you can hedge against inflation, give this video a like. If this video hits 1,000 likes, I'll do it, I promise. Also, if you're new, you can check out some of the other personal finance videos on our channel. Subscribe, become a financial warrior, guys. Join us on the journey, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.